Hey everybody, it's Eric from EPautos.com, your libertarian car guy. Today's the day after the big announcement when Ford's CEO Jim Farley revealed their Model T moment. And as expected, it turned out to be anything but a Model T moment. It might even be considered or called the antithesis of the Model T moment. No surprises, Farley has announced that Ford is going to bring out another electric vehicle in 2027. Now, it's going to be shaped like a mid-sized truck apparently, so it'll be a little bit larger than the current Ford Maverick, but it'll be electric, and Farley says that it's going to be priced at around $30,000. Now, mind you, it's 2025, and unless inflation stops and unless the cost of everything just begins to go down again, the idea that they're going to sell this thing for $30,000 is... I mean, if W.C. Fields were still around, he'd say, "Ah, yes, my little chickadee." So, and leaving aside the fact that it's electric, and every single time, I'm pretty sure I'm right about this, every single time an electric vehicle has been announced and they say it's going to cost X, it always ends up costing more. And that, of course, is a function of the fact that they haven't been able to figure out how to reduce the cost of batteries. Part of the reason for that is that the batteries have to be so huge, at least using what they call the current technology. Lithium-ion batteries are just not a very efficient way to store electricity. To give you some sense of context, your typical EV has an 800 to 1,000 pound battery pack, because that's what it takes to store the energy of equivalent of about half a tank of gas, so about 7 gallons of gas. Think about that. You may not know this, but a gas tank, empty, weighs less than 100 pounds. I mean, a lot of them are made out of plastic now. I mean, they're weighed next to nothing. Gasoline weighs about 6 pounds. So, run the math, as they say. Take six pounds or so and times it times 15, which is roughly what the average current car's gas tank holds. Add a little bit more for the weight of the gas tank itself, and what you end up with is a fraction of the weight of a typical EV battery pack. And you have the ability typically to drive a vehicle with 15 gallons of gas for 350, 400 miles. Some go farther than that. And of course, it's very easy to refill the gas tank because it's just a liquid fuel. It's not under pressure. It just gets pumped into the tank. Whereas with electricity, you're talking about drawing in voltage, extremely high voltage. And that's very difficult to do very difficult to do quickly, I should say, without generating a lot of heat and a lot of potential for fire and a lot of potential that you're going to end up damaging the battery pack. So it's kind of just this impossible catch-22 unless they come up with some breakthrough. And I've been hearing about the breakthrough in batteries since I began my career as an automotive journalist back in the early freaking 90s. I was one of the first journalists to test drive the Ford EcoStar, which had a sodium sulfur hot battery, and I drove the GM EV1/Impact. Drove all of them. They still haven't materially improved because they're still relying on more or less the same basic technology, and it's just a problem. Anyway, so, Ford has decided that it's going to bring out another one of these things. And I just don't understand where Farley is coming from. He's not a dumb man. I mean, surely he knows some of the history of the Model T. The Model T was a very simple car, specifically designed by Henry Ford to be simple and affordable, to use the fewest possible parts, and all of those parts were designed to be mass-produced at scale. And the end result was a vehicle that just about anybody, literally just about anybody, could afford to drive. It was so inexpensive that, if you were a Ford assembly line worker, you could afford a Ford. And I'm talking about being able to buy the thing. I'm not talking about making payments on it for the next 6 to 7 years. I think Farley, and it's not just Farley, this is a general criticism of where we're at now in the car industry, they just don't get it. And I think part of the reason they don't get it is because these executives are being paid literally double-digit millions every year. So somebody like Farley, somebody like Mary Barra over at General Motors, they're getting paid $20, $30 million a year. Okay, so in the course of 3 months, maybe 6 months, these people are taking in more money than most of us will ever accrue over the course of our entire lives. We'll work 50 years. By the time we're old, and everything that we'll have to show for that won't amount to more than a few months of what somebody like Farley or Barra over at GM take in a couple of months. So, I mean, think about psychologically the effect of that. Imagine if you had that kind of money coming in, not just for a year, but for several years. Imagine if your bank account had, $150 million in it, or $50 million, or whatever. You no longer have to worry about money, and something like a $30,000 vehicle, well, that's like you or me going into the dollar store and buying a Snickers. It's not even that. It's trivial. It's inconsequential. They are disconnected from the concerns of just regular working and middle income people in this country. At least that's my hypothesis. Now, there's a more sinister spin to be put on this potentially, and that is that they are perfectly aware of it, and that this is all part of the push toward, this isn't my term, transportation as a service. You may have heard that. A number of automakers use that term, or a term that's basically similar to it. And what it means is they are thinking about being in the business of renting you rides, in other words, not selling you a car that you own after you pay it off, at which point, you're a car owner and you can drive your car. They're talking about renting you a ride or leasing you a car. And basically it amounts to the same thing. And that's how they think they're going to get over this hump of the affordability problem. And also, it will allow them to put everybody just about onto this perpetual debt treadmill where you never pay it off, you never own, you just continue to pay every month, pay. This is what the WEF was talking about a couple of years ago when they ran that ad campaign about how you'll own nothing and be happy. No, you'll be real happy as long as you can continue to make those payments, as long as you don't mind being insurfed, as long as you don't mind possessing nothing, perhaps not even the shirt on your back. They actually have talked about renting clothes too, by the way. So, I don't think that they haven't considered this. Certainly I do think they haven't given any, let me rephrase this, they could, but they haven't pursued what would be something like the original Model T or the Ford Volkswagen. Ford has the technological and engineering capability to bring out a modern Model T that would be, in principle, everything the Model T was, and yet modern. I'm not suggesting we go back to something that is as primitive as the Model T was, with a top speed of 30 or 40 miles an hour, with all kinds of elaborate and finicky controls. I'm just talking about something like what they used to make back in the 90s, when they made economy cars, and you could buy a little entry-level Ford for around $10,000. A lot of people don't remember that. There's no reason at all they couldn't go back to doing that. Of course, it wouldn't have 6 airbags, it wouldn't have climate control AC, it wouldn't have a lot of the luxury amenities that are now considered standard, even in what they call entry-level cars. But it would be affordable, and people would be able to buy them, and, that would be great. But they're not doing that. And so it begs the question as to why. Anyway, more over at EPautos.com, the web's best libertarian gearhead site. Thanks as always for listening, and we'll have more for you again soon.